Hey everybody, hope you're all doing good. So yeah, flying through my pile of shame during quarantine. Like stuff is just getting painted every day. Wish I could get a haircut. It's growing over my ears. It's starting to drive me crazy. I want to do like the Skrillex thing and just, shave the sides. But in a previous video I painted up a bunch of Skulkers, I think is what they're called, from the Gibbering Hordes. It's Wyrd's new Skirmish game. People who make like Malifaux and I really like the models, so I'm finally getting around to basing them. I've used them in games before, but we're gonna do some like jungle kind of like foresty sort of bases for them. So anyways, yeah, we'll get on with it. So first off, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some pieces of this cork stuff, and you can find this at like office supply stores or like Walmart, places like that. And all it is it's like the cork backing that they put on bulletin boards and things like that. And it comes in big rolls and it's super cheap. But I'm putting it behind, I'm trying to put it in places where I think I'm gonna pin later, because ideally I wanna have at least one pin in these guys to reinforce them to the bases. So I'm gonna make some little fake rocks out of the cork stuff and then pin through that later. I'm also gonna use some of this stuff. They're not actual rocks. It's called Growstone, I think is what they market it as, or like Hyper Tufa, something like that. So what this is it's hydroponic rock, and it's like an expanded kind of lava rock, but it's super soft. So what you can do is you can take pieces of it and then sand off one of the sides so that it'll lay flat, and but it looks like cool looking rocks. I've heard that you can also use like zeolite kitty litter, like that there's certain types of kitty litter that are made of kind of the same kind of stuff, where it's like soft and porous and it'll soak up like super glue and things like that, but they make cool looking little rocks. Next, I'm going to take some little pieces of slightly larger gravel. So what I did was I went down to the creek and then I just grabbed some sand, and then I filtered out the sand, and I kept some of the bigger little rocks in a separate container, and then I kept the fine grain sand in a different container. So I'm going to put down the little slightly heavier grain, those slightly bigger grain rocks first, and then I'm going to put down the smaller ones second. But I'm trying to sort of like fill in cracks, places where I want to hide boo-boos or just build up some texture with this stuff first. But for the last little bit of texturing gravel stuff, I'm not going to use super glue. I'm going to use, I'm actually using Mod Podge to do this, just because somebody gave me some Mod Podge gloss, and it's not going to get used for anything else, but it's kind of like the right consistency. I want it a little bit runnier and like more liquid, and I'm even going to water that down a little bit. So all I wanted to do is just kind of run into the cracks, and I wanted to just kind of run all over it and seal things too. And then I'm gonna pour the really fine grit sand on top of that. But you could use any kind of PVA glue, like school glue, Elmer's, Eileen's tacky, any kind of PVA glue for this. Just water it down a little bit. And then I'm gonna prime everything black. Next, I'm going to go ahead and go in and dry brush all the stone. First up is P3 Gun Corpse Brown, and I'm using makeup brushes to do this. Makeup brushes, there is something about them, I don't know what it is, it's witchcraft. Like, they are designed to, first off, they're really soft. Second off, they're designed to hold pigments, not paint. So they don't really hold paint that well, but they are just like magic for dry brushing, because they're super soft because they're supposed to be used on your face, and then they just don't hold that much paint when you put it into a paint pot. And that's how I like to do it. I just dip it in there and then dry brush on there. And then they also come in multiple sizes, so you can use like a big shader, like a blush brush or whatever, and then hit a big piece of terrain with it or something, or a bigger base like this, and get really good results. When I'm dry brushing, I like to do a test where I'll take it and then rub it across my hand, and then if it picks up the ridges of my hand, then you're good to go. It's ready to go on the model. Next up, I'm going to come in with some P3 Trader Green, and I am kind of focusing a little bit more on the dirt, because I want it to look like it has some moss stuff kind of growing on it. But I'm also going to hit the rocks too, because I want them to look like they have moss growing on them. And everything is going to get covered up in flock later too, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm not being really careful with this stuff, but the dry brushing, it really adds something to the later steps. And last up, I'm going to use some dried out old Citadel Deneb stone. I'm not even sure if they make this color anymore, but the Citadel paint pots, they do not seal very well, and dried out paints are great for dry brushing. But I'm going to focus on the rocks with this gray, and I'm going to put the least amount of the little highlights on here, and it's just to bring out those very tippy top kind of highlights on the tops of the rocks. And I'm not going to get the gravel at all, just rocks with a little bit of Deneb stone. And the last step before I start doing flocking is I'm going to hit these guys with some pigments. And you could use weathering pigments, or you probably use like makeup or anything that you want to do this step. It's not totally necessary, but so the one thing that I will say about this is that these come in, they're artist pigments, and then they come in actual traditional kind of pigment colors. Like this is a burnt sienna, and burnt sienna it's a natural pigment. They dig it out of the ground and then they burn it. It's an earth tone, so it just looks like dirt basically. it's a, you know, it's a natural earth tone, and it makes a nice looking dirt. And after that, I'm gonna do some green pigments too. And this is just gonna kind of look like, you know, like grass or whatever, undergrowth or moss, things like that. So yeah, I want to get some on the rocks too, but this is gonna look like grass later. And don't worry that it looks like neon right now, because we're gonna tone that down later. And finally, some gray pigments for the stone. And the thing that's different about these than doing dry brushing too is that they settle in the cracks. It doesn't pick up the highlights. It actually, I mean, it does stain the highlights, but it wants to settle in the cracks more, especially after you put varnish on it, because the varnish will make it sort of eventually kind of settle into the cracks a little bit. And since that's the last of the painting, it's time to varnish. Outside. Do it outside. And now it is all about the flocking. It's going to be all about adding different cool layers of flocking, and you're going to get to see all of the cool stuff that I've collected over the years for basing. So for this part, I'm actually going to use some clear Elmer's school glue, just because of the fact that it dries clear and it also dries non-gloss, unlike super glue or Mod Podge or whatever. And I do want it a little bit runnier. I want it so that it'll kind of seep down into those cracks a little bit. So I'm adding just a little bit of water to it. It's not just Elmer's like straight out of the bottle, but it's pretty close to it. And the first layer of flock that I'm going to put down is just going to be some flock. And this is a mixture of different types of, this is all foam, kind of grass flocking. And you can find this stuff, it's originally, I think it was Model Railroad kind of hobbyists. And this is a few different types. You've got some ultra fine green flock, and then you've got some larger kind of like lime green kind of pieces of foam flock. This is basically like the stuff that you would find in your couch, but it's been dyed green. And then when you glue it down, it just, you know, it looks like foliage. So yeah, just gonna cover up all that dry brushing with the flock. But if you don't put it all over, and then you kind of combine like different methods, you get something that looks really realistic when you're done with it. Another thing that I think looks cool is to use a little bit of Sphagnum Moss. And this is just, it's actually dried out moss. It's real moss, but it's been preserved. And, but less is more with this stuff. You don't want it to just completely take over everything. Another thing I like to use is a little bit of ultra fine sand, and this is another thing that I picked up at like Hobby Lobby. I think it's made for sand art, but it's just like super fine grit, and it's actually kind of colored too. So, but it looks cool when you kind of sprinkle it in with the other foliage. And I'm actually going to put something on top of that after. Another kind of flock that's really fun to use, but again, less is more. I think it looks way better if you put just a little bit of this stuff down instead of all over the place. I see a lot of people do that where they just put it everywhere and it looks like garbage. But the static grass, and it comes in different sizes, but like the smallest, one of the smallest is 3mm. So if you think about that, like if your mini is like 28mm, then that's like a foot tall or something like that. So I think it looks better if you just put down little patches of it instead of everywhere. And you can buy static grass applicators and like, little static grass tuft makers and things like that, but they're expensive. And sprinkling it on does not look that bad. You can just blow on it and then it kind of stands up on its own. And after it's dry, I'll even come in and do some bushwhacking, like kind of do some hedge trimming stuff to tone down the moss, because it gets a little out of control, I think. And it's time to do one of my absolute least favorite parts of this whole hobby, pinning. So what I'm doing is I'm drilling a little spot, and on these guys I found that the flattest part, like the best spot to drill them, which is not saying much because there's really like no good spot to do this, is on the bottom of their back feet. So I kind of planned ahead to do that. Like I had pieces of cork where I knew that they were going to be laying flat, and then I was planning on pinning them through those parts. So I'm just going to take a little drill bit that's about the size of a paper clip, and then I'm going to snip off a little piece of paper clip, put it in there, and then I'm going to put that through. I'm going to use the mini to like mark a little spot through the cork part, and then I'm going to drill through the cork part. And hopefully if I left enough of a nib on there left on the other side, then I can just super glue the nib onto the other side, and that'll be super secure. So I put a little bit of super glue into the foot of the mini, and then when I insert the nib all the way through to the other side, then it gets super glued on the other side, and that's a really strong bond, and it's not coming off of its base after that. So I like to pin the feet first and then put the pins in the feet and then push them into the cork to kind of mark how I want them to go through, instead of the other way around, like bending the model or something around the pins or having them already in when I'm like painting and stuff like that. So I'll just mark them on there, like put like 2 little marks, and then I'll use the pin drill to put some little holes in there. And if they're off to one direction too, then I'll even drill in that direction, so that I'm not fighting with it to try and push their little feet into the base. But ideally when I'm done, I want it to look like this. I want 2 little drops of super glue on the other side, and I don't really want much super glue at all showing on the feet. And for the very last little bit of flocking, I'm going to use some of this cool other dried moss. And this is just another preserved dry moss. And people use it, they use it in like floral arrangements and things like that. They put it around their fake plants, but I think I found it at Hobby Lobby again. Great thing about Hobby Lobby, every time you go, you can use a 40% off coupon. I know that they're like horrible people, but you can get it on the cheap. Another cool thing about using flocking is that you can use it to hide your boo-boos. Like with this guy, I didn't like how he had one foot that looked flat, but then it wasn't making contact with the base, so I used a piece of moss to hide that. But next up, just to tie everything together, I'm going to use some black-green game ink. It's just like a dark green green shade. And then I'm going to go around and I'm going to put that on everything on the base. I'm going to put it on the static grass to kind of tone down the like neon color. I'm going to put it on the rocks because I want it to sort of go into the cracks and look like the rocks are mossy. And just anywhere that looks like neon green, I'm going to put it on there, or dirt, because I want that. I want everything to look very lush and green, like forested, all over the base. But this is going to tie everything together. It's going to make everything look lush and green. It's going to hide the any super glue that got around the feet, and it's just going to it's going to be that last step to make everything pop. And it's really going to help with anything that looks like neon green, any kind of unnatural looking dyes that are in the moss or in the static grass or anything. And very last, I'm going to go ahead and repaint the rims of the bases black. Just because I do that with all my minis. I just like how it looks. So anyways, that's going to be it, you guys. Hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and sane. This is how I'm dealing with quarantine. I'm painting and making YouTube videos. But yeah, welcome to all my new subscribers. And if you like the video, consider dropping a like or subscribing. Just means that, I might pop up in your channel instead of like influencer drama or like, bum fights, whatever else they show on YouTube these days. Just lets people know that you like videos about mini painting. So let's spread the evangelism, spread the love. Alright, take care you guys. Stay safe.